Good evening. Today is Monday, June 12th, 2023. This is the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Jess, can you verify that the meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Okay. We are now at the section of our committee meeting where the citizens are allowed to speak. Jess, do we have any speakers?
We have none.
Thank you. Moving on to the first action item, which is the approval of the minutes from May 8th. Are there any comments or discussion items? Ms. Voigt?
I move that we approve them as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McCaffrey. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 5-0. The next action item is the approval of the vouchers. Sherry, did we have any questions?
No, we did not.
Look at all of this. Wonderful. Okay, I'd be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Passes 5-0. All right, before we move on to our discussion or information items, I just wanted to reach out to Sherry. We received notice that she is retiring at the end of the month. We're sad to see you go, excited for where your journey is going to take you next, but appreciate all of the hard work that you've done supporting the finance team over the years. It's been very, very valuable. And in moving forward, in saying that we do have quite a few items on the agenda this evening, so I've asked in certain cases that we'll kind of move the discussion along, open it up for board commentary as necessary, and then keep moving. So the first discussion item is a database description and pricing. Ms. Landish and Dr. Siebert?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Kozlowski. So in front of you, and I'll take the lead on this one, in front of you, we've presented to you a pretty broad overview of all of our databases in the system. Those of you that were on the board about a year ago at this time, you probably received what was the end result of the purchase already been made. And so in an attempt for some proactive transparency and just continual updating around this area, we're bringing it for you before the approvals go through. We're not seeking your approval this evening, but rather just an open discussion and information item on this. I want to say that the list prices are the most updated renewals in terms of what you see on the database descriptions and pricing. The descriptions are there for you to see an overall general view of the areas and what we use them for. And then I just want to remind the board with our curricular implementation that it's really going to be key that the teaching and learning team continue to monitor the circulation usage in each of these areas. And I think especially after next year with a year one implementation in a lot of the curricular areas, we will have a better view as we analyze the usage reports to monitor whether or not we will continue to utilize some of these databases or not. So again, open for just questions as you look over the broad view of purchases. You'll see the top purchases, they're paired out into what is used with the common school funding, and then some of them that are district purchases that come out of Mr. Schloman's technology account. So there's just a few up top that are district purchases that do not come from the common school funds, but most of them you see will come right off of the top of our distribution, our annual distribution.
Any questions, comments? Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I just have a question for the folks who are looking at this. You mentioned, Ms. Landish, that kind of review it from a curricular perspective. Do the services themselves or the companies provide us access or usage data that we can use to evaluate that? Because I kind of wonder sometimes if we have a $20,000 database that's available for our middle school students, are 100 kids accessing it or are 3,000 kids accessing it?
Right, so some of them do and some of them do not. We have to do it through our internal systems. But I will say on Saturday, after graduation, I received in my inbox a spreadsheet from the librarians because they asked one of our clerical assistants to work on this. They knew I was prepping for this upcoming meeting. So I do have some trend data and some tabs that do allow me to see those usage reports, and that's what I'll use in the decision-making moving forward. The team will use that information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so just a quick question on the common school funds budget. Is that something where we have to make choices about which products or licenses or whatever library books we purchase and some things we may not have funds left over for? I guess the question I'm asking is the purchase of any of this software potentially at the expense of other things we could use those funds for but choose not to?
Well, I think it's at the expense of what we're prioritizing. So we actually are going to make a priority that these purchases come off of the top of the common school funds. So all these tech and database purchases will come off, in essence, the top dollar that we receive before we start doing any other library technology purchases. And I would say the last layer is just the purchasing of what you have seen all year long is just the library books for each of the schools.
Okay, thank you.
So I just have a question regarding the elementary Pebble Go. Can you give a little bit more of a detailed piece? I've had comments from parents when it comes to what this is, and is it more like a Google search that they type in and can Google multiple different things? Is it limited? Is there categories they pick from?
I have not been on this database for a while, but yes, in terms of your describing like a general Google, it is an encyclopedia, so I would say it's an enclosed, meaning they don't go out to get it, right? It's within the app that they search in the old school style of like encyclopedia topics. So they would enter their search and find articles according to those related areas.
Is there abilities to control content, so that same that we do in other areas when it comes to topics that are age appropriate for the grade level in elementary?
I'd like to answer what my suspicion is, but I'd have to truly go back to that app and look. I don't want to give you an answer that's not accurate. I would say because we've gone, Mrs. Kozlowski, through such the vetting process that we have, tech usually does those grade level appropriate checks before they even send it to curriculum, so this would be no different in this area. But I can give the board an update on like the grade specific controls on the specific app, if that would be something you would
I've
like.
had questions on that.
Okay.
On what content, and I think it would just be
Sure,
fair, high level, yes or no.
I can do that for you. I'll put it in upcoming update.
Great, thank you. Ms. White?
I was just going to say, I did have an opportunity to use PebbleGo when I was at Rose Glen for the Grandparents' Day recently. And one of the things that we had a chance to do was to use it to do a research activity. And it was like set up like an encyclopedia. We wanted to look at parks, so we ended up going and looking at Mount Rushmore. And it was very age appropriate in terms of the kinds of things that we were having a chance to, get exposure to that type of topic.
Got it. No, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so the next update really is just on those, and then is this something we would see annually?
Yes, I'll probably come to the same committee every year just before the databases are due and give some information to the board. So please feel free in between over the months to give me any feedback, and I'll also give you the PebbleGo in your Friday board update.
That sounds good, thank you. All right, the next discussion item is district association memberships.
All right, well, I'll take the lead on this one. We have two district association memberships. The first being the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. The annual cost for the WASB is $14,639 for next year. The WASB offers a variety of services and programs, professional development for board members, policy guidance. They offer free legal assistance. They also do a number of workshops and networking opportunities, as well as the co-sponsor the state education convention with other local organizations in January. They also do a lot on the legislative area, particularly in budget times. The second one that we belong to is the Southeastern Wisconsin Schools Alliance, or also known as the SWSA. The annual cost there for next year would be $3,200. There are 29 school districts in southeastern Wisconsin that belong to the SWSA, and all of them pay $3,200 with the exception of South Milwaukee, who is the fiscal agent. They pay $1,600, and Elmbrook, who hosts some of the in-person meetings. Many of them are online, but they do host some in-person ones, and they pay half of the dollar amount as well. They are really a collaborative resource-sharing organization. They bring the districts together to advocate for, in this particular case right now, doing a lot with policy and budget preparation, organizing thoughts and trying to work together as closely as we can on those things. The challenge, I would say, with both of these organizations, probably bigger challenge for the WASB, over 400 school districts in the state of Wisconsin, trying to find ways to meet the needs of all of those member school districts, I think for the WASB at times can be a challenge. Similarly for the SWSA, 29 districts, not all of us certainly are the same on any front, so I think there's always challenges there as well. But like we discussed last year, we're trying to put these in front of you to say, before we have the bills ready for a July 1 payment, but wanted to certainly talk with the board in terms of your level of interest in maintaining membership in both of these going forward.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sieber.
You're welcome.
Any questions, comments? Mr. Wad?
Yes, thank you. So Dr. Sieber, can you help me as somebody new to WASB? When they issue, and I'm looking at one that came out today, action alert, right? And without weighing in whether I agree or not with the position they take, and it's on the Joint Finance Committee decision to not fund Office of School Safety.
Mm-hmm.
Do they survey their members before they make a determination as to an official position on behalf of the membership? Or are they empowered to make those decisions just by virtue of their staffing and what they choose to prioritize within their executive leadership?
That's a very good question. I think there's a couple of prongs. They have an executive board that makes a lot of those decisions for the group based on listening. They represent regions and trying to represent the thoughts of that region, somewhat like a senate, if you will, trying to make those kind of decisions. There's also a lobbying arm of the WASB that's actually shared with, like Darren, for example, is a member of the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials. I'm a member of the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators. They partner to have a lobbyist that is for the SAA, which is the School Administrators Alliance, and then that lobbyist tries to gather as much information as they can too. And so I don't think they survey necessarily, but they try to have a pulse on what they believe is in the best interest of public education to represent the 400-plus school districts. Yeah, you bet. More acronyms, so those aren't on the sheet that Ms. Land just shared with you, but we can make another sheet for those potentially.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I know that SWSA went through some leadership changes and some, maybe some strategic changes. Would you be able to summarize some of those for us too, Dr. Siebert?
Sure. So me being also newer to the SWSA, I'd welcome Mrs. Voigt too to chime in on this. Terry Phillips was the longtime director of the SWSA. She retired, I believe, right after 2021, the 2020-21 school year, yes. They hired somebody to come in. That person only stayed a mere number of months, as I recall. And then since then, they've had an interim director who's a former school board member from Menominee Falls that has been running the organization. I believe they're in the hiring process again to try and find a new executive director. But also since the COVID period, the meetings have been online. Most people have appreciated the online meetings actually because of the distance between these 29 districts trying to get to one place, Elmbrook. So the online has actually come in handy for the 7:30 to 9 once per month meeting. But to your point, Dr. Piastek, there has been some lack of continuity in the leadership as of late.
Thank you.
So I have, as we start to go through looking at some of these renewals, and I know that this was one of the items that I brought up last year, it's the value add for the district as to what are we using, how are we using it. Neither one of these are significant in costs, but I do have reservations about how in touch they are with the districts that they support. And I was able over the last year to spend some time with WASB. I was at the convention. I took a look at the delegation and the votes and what topics they were addressing. And I don't think for Waukesha, WASB is as integrated and we are not as entwined with them, even to their own admission, as are they providing us the value and the resources that we needed for a district our size with the issues that we're facing amongst a population of others, with even having some of the brainstorming opportunities at the convention or other scenarios. So I would not be in favor of continuing. And the SWSA, I've spent some time looking at it, and I've, thank you, Jess, for sending, we did get the prior year contract. I don't think we've seen the current year. And the current law firm that they're using, Hubbard, Wilson, and Zelenkova, is a law firm that is based out of Madison, and with focuses that they're using, again, even with the number of districts that are involved, they're not in touch with, I think, some of the directions and the policies and support that we're needing. And so I question, even for $3,200, what are we benefiting from these organizations? How are they supporting us? How are they driving those pieces? And I think that's really my question back to the administration and the teams. At what point do we say being members of these organizations is just a cost that we have without the value that we're getting? And I for either of them, I have not seen that there's the value for them. So that's my thought.
Sure.
I don't know if there's, Ms. Voigt?
I think that WASB does offer a lot of good convention types of things, conference kinds of things. I was looking closely at the one that they're offering on July 14th, 15th. And a lot of the topics that are on that two-day agenda are youth mental health, post-pandemic, best practices of communicating in times of crisis, the power of proactive and preventive emotional well-being skill development, cybersecurity and citizenship, how to keep kids safe and districts secure in the online era, governing for continuous improvement. You know, I think a lot of topics that, do cover all the different types of districts that are out there that, and again, that's just one day, of topics that I thought would be worthwhile to attend and discover. And I think I've felt that the convention in Milwaukee has been worthwhile in a lot of ways, like some of the topics that we've been able to, be part of that learning mode there. And working with the other, groups that are also co-sponsoring that event.
I appreciate that. I attended and I've spent quite a bit of time researching, so I'll decline on that. I'm looking at what are we gaining, right? So we can attend conferences. There's so many different pieces of information that are out there available to us without a fee that I think support us. And again, it's a collective conversation as to what are we really seeing. My opinion is that these are not something that the district is truly benefiting from, nor has over the last several years. Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I'm relatively new to all of this too. I've found some of the resources that WASB provides to be useful. There are good educational content. Brett Hyde has reached out with interest in kind of working with us to see how WASB could become a better partner or a better resource for the district. I don't think it's lost on anybody. You know, I had the opportunity to attend the day at the Capitol with a few other board members and Dr. Siebert and Dr. Cook earlier this year. As far as events, I mean, very well organized. It was very nicely organized, but it was not necessarily representative of some of our opinions. And I think that's just the nature of sometimes who's either driving the initiatives or who's present in the conversations. So I would say that we probably haven't had as active a role or demanded as active a role in being involved in the conversations. And so I think if we were to really evaluate, are we getting our money's worth out of our membership in WASB? Probably not. The question is, who's responsible for that? So I would really like to suggest that we have a conversation with the WASB leadership and talk about how we can find ways to make the services that they offer valuable to us. Frankly, I don't think, $15,000 for that membership is not well spent if we have educational resources and materials and networking opportunities. And there were things that I got out of the conference that had nothing to do with the program of the conference, and so I thought that was really important. But I do think that we're missing in terms of, shared priorities and interests, and that's probably something that I would want to evaluate before we would say definitively that we don't have value. One of the things that I don't like about WASB are the points associated with tenure and participation. I think, it kind of gives this, it not even implies, it rewards tenure. And that's not the goal, rewarding tenure. It really should be provided as a service and not a badge of honor for participating in the most number of things. But frankly, they can do that if they want to do that. That's kind of up to individuals if they want to earn those points or not. I just want to spend time where it's valuable. So I think my opinion is that we should make the effort to engage to see how we may be able to have a bigger voice. And if we can't, then I think we should kind of reevaluate. But I do think there are a tremendous amount of resources, especially for new board members, especially in terms of Robert's rules and conflict of interest and policy guidance. And we may not always just agree. And I've even seen situations where WASB and Neola even disagreed on policies, and that's okay, to have all of those resources. But that one for me, I think, is worth putting a little time into understanding what the value is. And if I could maybe continue on the SWSA, I think I don't have a good sense for what we get out of that. And I say all that, I appreciate that Mrs. Voigt is our representative to that this year, and it's a new opportunity for us to have a committed representative in an organization that's changed quite a bit over the last couple years. But when I look at the member districts, with a couple of exceptions, I'm just not sure that we're getting something useful from that. But that's also kind of a similar question. I just don't know, for the amount of money that we spend for, the monthly meetings that are being hosted. My understanding is the cost essentially goes to some shared legal fees, potentially, and then some lobbying
Lobbying
sort of
efforts.
type things, yeah. And I don't know that those positions are necessarily positions that we would agree with, but the network itself and the ability to work with and participate with other districts it's a nice opportunity. So I'm not looking at it as a cost thing. I just wonder, where should we be putting our time and effort as far as these associations go?
Right. No, I think you make good points. You and I'd be happy to work with you to meet with Brett and talk more about Waukesha in WASB and what that looks like and how we could have a bigger role. I think that would be good, and any other board members that would like to do that, I think that would be great. In terms of the SWSA, I understand what you're saying. I mean, the 29 of us are very different. We meet online. Sometimes we don't necessarily, in this particular budget cycle, we didn't necessarily align with what the ask was that SWSA was promoting. Still, it was good to know what they were doing. But there are other ways that we can accomplish those things through the organizations that the business officials and the superintendents work through. We belong to CISA as well, where we get together with the CISA 1 districts, which is relatively similar. So there is some overlap, and I think that was our purpose in starting to have this yearly discussion is there unneeded overlap, potentially? And if there is there a way to streamline how it is that we go about belonging to various organizations? So I'm certainly open to any feedback or trying to answer any questions that we can.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Any other questions, Dr. Piasek?
Do we have a membership deadline for either of these organizations?
So SWSA, based on last year's contract, looked like it has to be signed off on by August, September, if I'm looking at last year. And then as for WASB, I don't know that one. Mr. Clark, do you?
I don't think they might state a deadline, but I don't think there's like it's not like they turn off our electricity or anything. It's a pretty friendly relationship. And I think that's the same for the SWSA as well. It's
September 22nd is the date on the document.
Okay.
So that gives us
Time.
quite a bit of time to dive deeper if you'd like.
Perfect. Mr. McCaffrey?
So Dr. Seaver, what do you think the benefits are? Because you're dealing with these people, right?
Sure.
So in your estimation, what would be the benefits of both organizations?
That's fair. The WASB, what stands out to me is the legal assistance that we get. So Darren uses them periodically. Sue, they are a great election resource for Sue at no cost, beyond what we pay for the fee. I've used them on a couple of different topics. So I think that's a benefit that I see from them. I agree with Dr. Piasek. The conference that we go to, many times it's the networking and the hanging out with the other people that's as beneficial as any of the sessions that you go to. We would, as administrators, still have access to that conference through our organizations that co-sponsor it. If we didn't belong to the WASB, though, the board wouldn't have the ability to attend that particular instance or the various other workshops and conferences that the WASB holds. So I think the legal guidance sets WASB apart a little bit for me. The SWSA, the legislative aspect of it, I find some benefit from that. I'm able to triangulate that with all of the other resources that we have when it comes to what is the budget going to look like, right? The business officials talk about it, the superintendents talk about it, CISAs talk about it, SWSA talks about it, WSB talks about it, so you can kind of formulate what it is that you think might work for you. But to that point, we do get that information from multiple venues.
Okay. Do we get a report on what they're lobbying?
Every meeting, there's a lobbying section.
Okay.
So Ramey is her name. She Zelenkova, I believe is her last name. She's the lobbyist, so she gives a report on, and we do get updates on legislation in regular emails.
Right.
So what are the bills that are proceeding and where are they at? So yeah, we do get that every month.
So you know what they're saying to the legislatures? I mean,
Yes.
is she a traditional lobbyist that actually goes and meets with people?
Yes.
And pushes her point and?
Yes.
And you know exactly what those points are that she's pushing? 'Cause
Yes.
it used to be budget per cost, increases per pupils. That was what she did a lot of.
Yes.
Do we think she went astray, or, I mean, what else do they lobby?
They were lobbying for a little over $1,000 per student over 2 years, actually 1,500.
Yeah.
It was, over 2 years. Getting special ed reimbursement up to 90%. So pieces that we stepped down from here in Waukesha because we didn't think those were realistic numbers.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so following up on the lobbying piece, how much of WASB's operations are centered around lobbying on behalf of educational issues for the various member school districts versus the educational piece that we've heard about, whether it's around, new member education, providing legal guidance, whatever it might be. Is lobbying a big part of what they do, or a smaller piece of their overall operations?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can give you an accurate breakdown percentage-wise of how they would split that up. I think they spend a lot of time on board member professional development and do more member orientation. But I think they equally, spend a lot of time helping districts in the legal area, and they spend quite a bit of time to, they're informed through the delegate assembly process. So member districts get to submit resolutions that they'd like to see move forward. The WASB board selects which ones they're going to move forward, and then each of our districts has a delegate that goes to the delegate assembly in January to vote on behalf of their board for those pieces. Now, do they become law in that meeting? No, they become what the WASB then further advocates for. So it is a member-driven process, but what percentage of their effort goes to that, I struggle to tell you.
And then just as a follow-up to that, in terms of their lobbying efforts, do we have a sense for how effective they are? Do they have a strong voice with legislators on both sides of the aisle that has led to changes that our school district in particular might find advantageous? Or
Again, another really good question. I can't necessarily say both sides of the aisle accurately, because I don't really know. I think they would be very similar in terms of their ask to what the SWSA was. What this tentative agreement that we're going to talk about in policy and governance, and I put in the update, is significantly different than that. So does that mean they're effective or ineffective? I don't think it means either. I think it means there's limited resources in the state of Wisconsin, right? And they're doing what they think they can manage. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer as well as you'd like.
I know those are, somewhat subjective. I just wondered if you had a sense for the effectiveness of their lobbying on issues that are important to us. Do we feel like they move the needle? I guess maybe is a better way to phrase what I was fishing for.
Sure. Yeah. I think the whole point of this discussion is I think some of our interests or some of our needs in Waukesha are a little bit different than maybe other districts. So I think that's always been the struggle at the WASB level is how do you represent, the northern districts when it comes to transportation have drastically different needs than we have, right? Rural communities have very different needs than suburban communities like us as compared to MPS and Madison. So there's always that struggle of one size never fits all at the WASB. And so I think any district would probably have a hard time saying that everything the WASB does aligns to what their priorities are.
I would just add that lobbyist effectiveness is like religion. Either you believe it or you don't. There's no measurable, right? They'll say, yeah, we got you 325 2 years in a row on the revenue limit this time. We might have been at 325 when the conversation, and you'll never know. So, but I would say just another thing on the lobbying, that's seasonal too, because the biennial budget's every other year. So every other year, their percentage of efforts around lobbying is probably significantly higher than the off year. So it's kind of a moving target.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing on this because we have, and this has been kind of a learning journey for me too, along with Dr. Siebert. In the policy committee tonight, I will talk about officially kind of expanding the scope of the policy committee to include also that governance and government affairs. So if you recall, a couple years ago, there was an ad hoc government relations committee, and then there was the policy committee, and we've made changes to kind of allow the policies that are associated with specific committees and themes like T&L and finance and HR to go to those committees, which creates some capacity on the policy committee to add the government relations piece to that. And it's not a coincidence that Mrs. Voigt, who is the SWSA representative, and Mr. Zenobia, who is the WASB representative, are both part of that committee. So the expectation is that then those report outs on those legislative priorities, those lobbying priorities, are something that can actually be entertained within that committee that now has the authority or the jurisdiction to kind of do that. So that was the intent of that, was to make it a little bit more strategic and to have those individuals who really are passionate about policy and legislation be part of that conversation, and then to make that committee more regular, not to have it be an ad hoc committee, but really it is a critical, it's the most critical thing that we do as a board, which is that policy and governance and legislation piece. So that was the reason for that, just to give some context. And so I guess I'm somewhat optimistic that in making some of those improvements, we have an opportunity to do a better job of really digesting what those organizations are proposing. And then, kind of making those decisions about what we think is valuable to us and what isn't.
Sounds good.
Great, good discussion. Any other comments, questions? Ms. Voigt?
There was a report on the WASB that was like trying to make a case for why we should renew it type of thing. And they mentioned that they tracked over 90 Assembly bills and over 75 Senate bills related to K-12 education in the 21-22 school year. So a variety of different types of pieces of legislation, and they provide oral and written testimony on at least 45 bills, and officially registered positions, support, oppose, neutral on 79 bills. So a lot of times what the discussion has been is at the WASB involvement that I've had is there's a topic coming up like financial literacy, which is one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow morning. How do districts feel about that? And since I used to teach personal financial planning as one of my main courses, I think it's a very important thing to be doing, But they'll get everybody's opinions, and then they'll decide what do they suggest to Ramey. Should she be supporting it or opposing it or whatever? But a lot of times it's, if there's a mixed discussion, it's been, we won't take a stand. Because our group doesn't have, we have good discussion on this side, we have good discussion on that side, so we're just going to take a neutral stand on it. And that's my, my take on it. That's giving you a chance to share what you think. And then you've got 29 different districts. What's the general feeling from southeastern Wisconsin? Yay or nay, or maybe neutral.
Great, thank you. All right, so follow-up is to kind of coordinate an opportunity just to have some discussions as to partnership with WASB and what that may or may not look like going forward.
Sounds good, yes.
All right, our next discussion item, Sherry, is the monthly budget report. And if it's okay, I'd actually like to do the budget and the ESSER discussions back to back versus having the charter in between, if that's all right with everyone? Okay. So Sherry, you want to just give a high-level oversight or overview?
Yep. Right now, at this stage, we're really trying to wrap up the current year and then be working on everything for next year. So as we stand right now, everything looks in very good position to end the year, but we will continue to work on finalizing numbers as we get ready for the audit. And then Darren and company will bring that back in August with where we're ending the fiscal year and where we're at with the budget development. Self-funding, both the insurance and the health insurance and the dental are rock solid. We're still seeing the trend of being at a positive position with them. Tax collection right on target. We're actually 82% exactly where we were last year at this point in time. So nothing exciting or nothing, which is always good in a budget report, not to have excitement. So
I was going to say that. There's nothing that is better than expected, on plan, and where we expect things to land. So does the committee have any comments or questions on the monthly budget? This is closure of the 2022-23 school year. Ms. Voigt?
I think one noteworthy thing that you pointed out was the $346,000 in interest in May of 2023 compared to only $40,000 in May of '22. So that's a major change that's, to our benefit at this point, that we're able to earn a positive interest rate on the money that we do have on hand.
Yep. Okay, great. Let's move into the ESSER update.
We are continuing to spend and continuing to claim. So nothing to really look at this month.
Yeah, relatively same.
It's really becoming a cash flow statement at this point.
Right, right. Any questions, comments? Okay, our next discussion item is the East Charter Agreement.
I can kick that off. We have Susan, our principal over at East, and she's here to have a little discussion about East Charter School because the board approved our charter application back in February, but as it was sent into DPI, there's been some discussion with DPI that's opened up some questions and conversations about, is it best to continue with East as a charter school or to move forward with it, removing it from the charter status and having it fall under the alternative education umbrella. And so Susan is here to discuss that, the pros, cons, the path we've been down with this. So,
Sorry, trying to find
are you able
oh, there it
to,
comes. Pardon me?
are you able to share?
Yeah, that's
You
fine.
are, oh, there we go.
A different room number came out.
And if you want to move the mic just a little closer, there's a chance.
Where aren't you clicking yet? Is that better? Alrighty. So thanks for meeting with us tonight for this discussion. We appreciate it from the east end of things. I'm going to give you a little history of kind of what went on with this whole charter process. So we did present back in February to the board and, got the approval for that. We did send it in right away to DPI for final approval. On May 15th, it was denied and a checklist was then provided of what they would like added. Okay. So when that happened, it led to looking at, we have to have set enrollment periods, a different type of a governance board, sibling priority, wait list versus lottery versus all these other options. So when we started looking at that compared to what the alternative laws under alternative education, there is very little difference, I guess you would say, with regards to the waivers that we had asked for when we came in for the charter. This is just a little bit, I did contact the Resource Center for Charter Schools just to see where we were at. With regards to the governance board, we would like, depending on the discussion where you want to go, if we were a school, we would still have something similar like a PTA, outreach type that way. But basically on the charter, the governance board acts almost like an intermediary between the school and the board. I don't know. And then we also learned with that, you have to have more outside members than you can have anybody on staff. So you, like myself, I wouldn't be on it. Somebody else would have to be on it to represent the school. When you want to look at alternative education, this is more my wheelhouse more than a charter, I'm not going to lie. I was used to doing alt ed prior to doing charter schools. So when we're looking at that, the law basically states that it is an instructional program approved by this board that utilizes successful alternative or adaptive school structures and teaching techniques that's incorporated into the existing traditional classrooms or regularly scheduled curricular programs that's offered in place of regularly scheduled curricular programs, basically traditional school. Alternative ed program does not include private schools or home-based private educational programs. And then if you look at the size of a school on an alt ed, we have to have a minimum of 30 and we could never go over 250 students, which even as the charter, we would not want to do that with the population that we serve because it is the at-risk population. Alternative schools operated by the school district or the consortium of school districts as an independent school. It has a DPI side number or a school code. We already have that. It is already listed as an alternative school. And all attendance, testing, and enrollment data is reported by that school. We are currently doing that under the charter. That would continue under alternative education. The school is subject to all requirements of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So kind of the difference. Operating an alternative schools as a charter school requires compliance with statutes 118.40, which includes sponsorship and compliance with state and federal laws, except where exemptions are permissible. While some alternative schools convert to a charter school status, very few of these programs actually require a charter because most of the modifications that occur in an alternative education charter schools are permissible under our existing laws under alternative education. And so what I went in is I pulled out stuff from the charter that we looked at for the waivers, and I wanted to try to just give you a little bit of a comparison so you can see how that would look. So when we were looking at the charter, we were looking under the statute 11833 on high school graduation requirements, and that allowed us to be flexible. So we have a different graduation structure than the traditional high schools. I did just throw on there kind of what we have done and agreed to was the 17 credit because the electives are naturally built into our workshops. That does not change at all under alternative education except for it falls under a different statute. So we can still do the exact same thing. Nothing would change between those two. With regards to the board policy, we also put that in there as a waiver, just we kind of covered it in all three fronts when we put the charter in, which allowed us to tailor our tailor education requirements for individual graduation plans based on their student needs. So flexibility allowed for unique and specific learning pathways for students based on the suitability, and this allows for non-traditional opportunities to occur at East. So we covered it in both the charter. We can do that again as an alternative school. In the charter, the days and hours of instruction can be modified, which we put in for that because we do offer a slightly different school day for our students. Again, it happens under alternative education. The same thing will happen. You can still modify the times to best meet the needs of your students. So no charter wasn't necessary for that as well. And then again, we put it under our board policy as well, so it covered like all three areas. Curriculum, it was the same thing. We put in for a written curriculum and how that can be slightly different or presented differently under the charter. It is the same for alternative education. They look for those different platforms and learning structures for students. So policy waiver would not even be needed under alternative education. And then Start College Now, we also had in the waiver that the students could still participate in that program, and that would also continue under the alternative ed status. And then even with an alternative school, our students could still participate in dances, extracurriculars, in sports. That's very common, and it's allowed under alternative education, just like it would be under a charter. So the students could still be participating in their home proms, homecomings, football games, teams. And then that's kind of what we're trying to weigh out, which is why we came to you. Do we keep the charter and go back and redo? We have to become a non-stock corporation, and that has to be listed with a financial institution that they can look at. We have to redo the governance board, and we have to redo a couple extra things in there. Or do we just let it lapse and allow the same thing that we're currently doing happen under the alternative education law? So, does that make sense?
So just real quickly,
Yeah.
before we go through discussion, how long has East currently been a charter? How many years?
Is it at Harvey?
Yeah, I'm looking at Patrick, the other one
It's been,
It's been 15, 20 years.
yeah, I would say 20 years, closer to 20.
And this is an annual renewal with?
Every 5 years.
Every
there's a
5 years
renewal.
with DPI.
Mhm.
And
And
there
I
was,
believe under funding in the beginning, when you start as a charter, there was funds available to help you start your school. There's no funding at all to assist us. It's the board and the district that does that.
I mean, I'm just really curious as to what changed on the side of DPI on a well-established charter that has gone through at least 2 renewals.
It's gone through, yeah, I think it's gone through at least 3 that I know of. I mean, I'm only here 2 years, but I know it's gone, this would, at least the 3rd.
Right.
That's, because I know it's your. So they sent back, sorry, all my cheat sheet notes here, that when I called, because when I got the denial, I called who's over the charters, and I'm like, can you explain what you want, so we could address all of that. And basically, for a while, they haven't been monitoring, I don't know what else to say, they weren't enforcing those components of the charters. So that's why now it's kind of switched over at DPI, where now they want us to add all kinds of stuff to the charter that they weren't enforcing before. So when I was given the original charter from 5 years ago, I followed that. I added in all the new stuff that we did. There was no, they didn't even send me a checklist until the 15th of May. I said that would have been helpful back in January, you know, but they didn't even send that. So I don't know how new this is, but then they sent me this. And so I was like, okay, so I was going through that, trying to figure out what we would need to add if we want to keep the charter, which we can do, or let it fall under alt ed and not have to go through all the governance of the DPI, to be honest. I mean, we'd answer to you.
Yeah, Dr. Siebert?
I'm gonna let-
We talked, Sherry, Susan, and I talked about this a great deal. I've had experience where you've been a charter and then it doesn't really make sense to continue being a charter. In this particular instance, having a lottery for a school like this really doesn't make sense, right? We need to get the kids that need these services in there when they need it. A sibling provision that you have to have as part of a charter really doesn't make sense because one family member may need alternative ed, another may not. So the more we looked at it, we just thought there's really nothing that we can't do as an alternative school, middle school and high school. And some of the things that we would have to do that the DPI has now told us we would need to do don't seem to make sense for the type of school that we're running.
So, Ms. Voigt, do you still have a question?
You asked my question originally. I've always considered an alternative school, you know, from a teacher's perspective. This is an alternative placement for kids that were having issues, you know, in the regular, you know, deficiency of credits and things like that. You know, I don't know the value of it being a charter per se, especially if there's extra hoops we've got to be jumping through now that we haven't had to for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Dr. Piasek?
What do your students have available as like athletics or extracurricular options right now?
They would, if they choose to, they can go back to their home high school to play sports and all
Under
of
the
that.
charter?
And they can under alternative ed as well.
Okay.
It's kind of like a homeschool student, you know how they can participate.
Yep. I just
Same-
didn't know if there was an added benefit of the alternative
No,
definition over the charter, but it sounds like either way,
correct.
we're not compromising that.
No.
Okay.
Mr. Wad?
So I'm curious, is there any financial implications one way or the other?
No. No.
Not for a long time.
No, when you start a charter school, Mr. Wad, you go through like cycles of grants. Like you get a planning grant, you get an implementation grant, you get another one, I can't think of the name, where you like share the resources with other districts to come see it. And a lot of those funds are very valuable. But once you get through that initial cycle of funding, there's no other, the district just funds the school like it funds any other school.
Whether it's alternative or charter?
Correct.
Either way.
Actually, I think you're putting yourself in a position to re-charter if new legislation and funding comes along. Right?
Yeah, probably. We'll know that in 23, 24 February. I looked into that. There's no money right now, not even set aside, so.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, and then just on the governance piece, what is what is the governance model now versus what DPI would
I-
require if it were chartered?
I think it's been pretty lax, to be honest. This is, like I said, my second year is now, and that was from one of my goals moving forward. but there wasn't much. I have like a kind of a leadership team, but we have outside agencies that we work with, so we do meet as a team. There's a parent rep, we get student input, partner, community partners and all of that, as we've been planning our transformation that we've been doing. Other than that, there isn't a true governance board, which should be like negotiating things with, like, they would be here, I would not be here, or, things like that.
In the truest form, Mr. Wad, like in our other charters, like at South or STEM, there's a governance board that contracts with our board, you, and the charter is the actual agreement that we agree to between the district and that governance board, and then it's a shared leadership model. The district, because it's an instrumentality charter school, it's part of the school district of Waukesha, so we fund the teachers, we fund the principal, they get the per student allotment of dollars like every school gets. But that governance board is the connection, link between the district and the school.
And if we choose not to pursue the charter here, would we maintain the same governance structure that you currently have in place?
Yes, definitely. They've been invaluable this year.
Okay, so, at the last meeting when we approved moving forward, we really were highlighting the successes of you and your team and meeting the needs of these students, right? And how valuable and important that is. So whichever way we go, that hand-holding, I think, is the most critical piece to that and how we move this forward. I just want to make sure that this is doing exactly what we are currently doing with the same ability to lead, manage as quickly as we need to for the students.
Absolutely.
And that is what we're saying this recommendation is going to do, correct?
Correct.
Any, Ms. White?
There was kind of how many students were going to be able to graduate? That percentage
Yes.
criteria that was coming through. Now with graduation behind us, can you fill in that last square?
Yeah, we went up we're at 87.75% graduation rate this year. And I've also, I shouldn't say my team, because we're a team, we really are, recouped 2 from last year even. So we had a couple super seniors. So hopefully even last year's grade will go up a little bit. But I think we were at like 63 or 64% last year. So they've come a long way. I mean, it's been
That's an astronomical improvement, and that is, it's very exciting to see. So we need to have a decision, right? This is not up for approval tonight, but by the end of this month.
I think what we're
se.
basically just looking for is if you feel strongly that we should continue down the charter path, we can still turn that around by the end of the month. But if you're comfortable with what we've described in terms of it just being an alternative school within the school district of Waukesha, the only thing that would change is it would come out of the charter column on the website and it would go over into the regular school column.
same school number.
And nothing will
changes.
change in what they offer, and we just won't correct what we've been asked to correct, and we'll let the charter lapse.
So there's really no downside,
Not in our mind, no.
okay? Dr. Piasek?
It sounds like you don't need a formal decision from the board, but from my perspective, I wouldn't want you to put the effort into doing this. It just doesn't seem like a good use of resources to try to do something that doesn't afford any benefit to us or to the students. I would much rather see the time and energy spent on helping them. So
I agree.
it doesn't make sense to me.
So based on discussions, I think that we're aligned with the path that we need to go,
Okay,
based on your recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Mr. McCaffrey?
When are the next charters up? I mean, the timing on this is inexplicable. So when are we up with the other charters? Because I'm envisioning maybe we have some more work to do on that.
The other charters have these pieces in place, and so,
I would just make sure we're not missing any pieces, if
Yes.
you know what I mean?
yes.
Just because of the timing.
Correct.
give them the checklist. I do want to say, though, in regards to the other charters, they wouldn't fall under alternative ed, so they don't have that same umbrella
Yeah, that's my
as
concern.
East. I would say, don't let those lapse.
Well,
And I'll give them this packet now, so they can start writing.
yeah. Right.
Okay, I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and our next discussion item is secondary enrollment report.
All right, well, I'm going to lead that one, so let me just pull it up here. There we go. All right. So what we're going to try to do here is just kind of give you a high-level overview of where we are trending at the 612 level, and specifically at the 612 level in the brick and mortar schools. So I'll explain to you some of the differences between the applied population study that talks about all of our students versus what we're talking about tonight, which is just the kids that are in the physical buildings. So with that being said, how do I go down here? There we go. Oh, I should put this in presentation mode. I don't know, how do I do that? I'll just scroll through it, it'll be fine. All right, so if we just start with the overall district enrollment, I think you've seen charts like this in other conversations that we've had. So we go back to 2010-11. Now this is K-12 or 4K-12. And we start with 13,796. As of this year, we're at 11,877. So that's 1,919 kids over a 12-year period. So that's roughly that 1.25% decline that Darren often talks about when we talk about the budget. And we see that then in our baseline projections as well from the Applied Population Lab. That is a group out of the University of Madison. We had this last done in the year 2020. And what they do is they try to make projections based on the predicted birth rate, which is not an exact science by any stretch, but it's the best that you can do to plan for 10 years from now. So we have these projections through 2030, and everything that we've learned from looking at these projections shows that we anticipate that because of the birth rate declining, that trend to continue at that 1.25% for the foreseeable future. We'll go to middle school enrollment first, and we also, last year or 2 years ago, I think it was last year actually, with Bray Architects, who partnered with us on the referendum, had them do a facility capacity study for us. And so that's where we get the 3,000 number in terms of the number of seats that we have at the middle school, grades 6 through 8 level. So we're showing you the last 6 years, and you can see we are just slightly declining in our 612 or 6-8 buildings, from 2637 in 2017-18 to now 2289 as we finished this year, which compared to the 3,000 capacity shows that we have a gap of 711 kids. So we're below capacity by 711 kids based on this particular actual data. The enrollment projection from the capacity, or the Applied Population Lab, actually, I'm going to have a graph that's going to come up here next, shows us being even a little bit lower than what we, actually a little higher, I should say, than what we actually are trending. But again, you have to remember that's because that's counting E-Achieve kids in the case of the middle school. So I'll be able to show you that on this next slide. So this is, the yellow line is our actual district in the buildings, brick and mortar attendance. The blue line is that Applied Population Lab study, and the green one is our overall capacity. So you can see we're trending below it. If you add the E-Achieve kids, for example, in 2020, 2021, we have 279 kids in E-Achieve. All right, so in that case, we're actually, that was our COVID year, we're above the projection. We're at 2653, so we're actually higher when you include the E-Achieve kids. But then in the next 2 years, 21, 22, we have 220 kids in E-Achieve, so we're trending just below the blue line. We're at 25, 22 total district kids. And same for this current school year, we have 175 middle school kids in eAchieve. So we're trending at 2464 total. So even when we include our virtual kids, we're still trending in a downward philosophy. But again, our focus tonight was simply on the in-school brick and mortar kids. When we look at high schools, again, back to that Bray Architects facility study, and when they do high schools, what this facility study number is based on is using a classroom 6 out of 8 periods a day. So that's not, we're not using them every single period of the day. It's giving us even a little bit of buffer to get these capacity numbers that total 4,338 students at Northwest and South. So again, looking at our in-person enrollment, you can see we ticked up from 17-18 to 18-19, but then we've had that steady decline of the in-person students to the point right now where we are at 3,394 within the actual brick and mortar facilities, which is a gap of 944 kids. So that means we are 944 students below the capacity that our high schools can hold at this particular point. That being said, we then go to the Applied Population Lab projection, which they showed. Again, they're higher, and that factors in the eAchieve kids again. And then we go to this particular chart where we show, again, in the same colors, those trends. Putting the eAchieve kids back in, we have 596 in 2021, the COVID year. That puts us at 4156, so we're very close to the projection. In 21-22, we have 561 eAchieve kids, so we're at 4049. We're trending below the projection. And in 22-23, we have 594 kids, and we're at 3988, so we're almost identical to the projection. Now, if you take Susan's East kids and our WTA, Wisconsin or Waukesha Transition Academy kids, you put another 100 on that, roughly combined between those two. The applied population study is quite accurate. I mean, we're kind of right where they would say we would be with all the kids. But we're really more concerned with the in the building population. Again, I can't say that probably too many times. So with all that being said, the applied population study shows that the birth rate is declining. That's not unique to Waukesha. That's unique to, there are very few school districts in the state of Wisconsin that are growing. Most of us are declining, or if you're lucky, if you're maintaining stability at where you're at. And we talked about earlier that attendance is predicted to decline through 2030 by that 1.25%. The reality is, rumors start because we have and we continue to investigate the size of the district footprint. And we've taken steps as a board and administration to address that footprint by merging Whittier and Hadfield, by selling 2 district buildings to Carroll to make sure that the number of students that we have matches the number of facilities that we have from an efficiency and an opportunity perspective. But I also want to be very clear that there's not been a discussion at the board level regarding closing North High School. And I know that is a rumor that is rampant out there. Based on what I just showed you, we do not have the capacity at the high school level at this time to make that recommendation to you administratively or for the board to even consider that. We don't have the number of seats available for that to happen. All that being said, we are going to have to continue, if these trends continue, administratively, it's our job to continue to look at all of these opportunities in terms of what might be possible. But I just want to be very clear that that discussion has not happened at the board level, and we do not have the capacity to make that decision, recommend that decision to you at this time. And then I also want to talk about some next steps. So we talked about this at the last Student Services meeting. Mr. Wad suggested it's something we will follow through on. We will conduct another open enrollment survey. That's part of this discussion. The kids leaving the district that could be staying, also attracting kids to the district that could be benefiting from some of our programs. We did the last survey in we did one in 16-17, we did one in 19-20. So it'll be a good time for us to do another one, and we'll be able to present those results to you. We'll get that done this summer at some point. We're going to update our facility capacity study that Bray helped us with once we finalize the sale of Randall, because that'll take another building out of our mix, and then it'll give us another look at what we're talking about, both at the elementary level and then that trending up through the secondary level. And then we will consider updating our applied population study with the Applied Population Lab, probably in 2 years, because Darren and I talked, we think every 5 years it would be good to refresh that. That data, actually, when you throw in virtual kids, is pretty accurate, and they do a really pretty solid job. So, but every 5 years is probably a good time to kind of take a look at that again and see if we're noticing any different type of trend. So education, I think it's fair to say, has shifted, right? It's not the same as when we were kids and you lived in an attendance border and that's where you went to school. It just isn't like that anymore. We have open enrollment, we have vouchers and school choice, we have independent charter schools moving in to the community. So we've always had the parochial schools and opportunities. And it's good for families to have all those opportunities. Really, truly it is. But what it does is it puts pressure on all of us to compete, right? And so through a number of these different surveys and capacity studies, we can figure out how we continue to figure out what the right path is for the school district of Waukesha. But let me stop there, and that's a lot of information in a short period of time, but I thought it was important, based on some discussions that we've had and some discussions that are happening in the community, for us to really put out there what the reality is. So happy to try and answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you. I think this was invaluable. I will speak that we all know what happens with the telephone game and the rumor mills, and it spreads very quickly, and I think data doesn't lie. And this was good to see. And I also like to see about the surveys, because I do think that the school district of Waukesha is an exceptional district for students. It's attractive for staff and students, families alike. And that changes how we take a look at things going forward as well. So thank you. Ms. Voigt?
I want to thank you very much for doing this analysis. The North is closing rumor has just been incredible. Like, I feel like since I've been elected to the board, I've had more people coming up and saying, is North really closing? I've heard North is closing, saying that they're not going to apply for a job in the school district of Waukesha because if a high school is going to be closing, what's their long-range potential staying here? Why should they sign up for youth sports at North because it's closing? So why should they be a junior North Star for basketball in 5th grade if there won't be a high school when they get there? Et cetera, et cetera. And there are so many things that are, detrimental to kids choosing to go to North, since it is very much a choice situation in this world, when they think it's not going to be there 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, et cetera. So I really appreciate trying to be able to, I can honestly say that we're not looking at doing that because I didn't know what the board had been looking at doing, that we can honestly say that that's not on the, in the realm of current consideration. So please come, don't make this a self-fulfilling prophecy that we won't have any kids there because they thought it was going to be closing and, et cetera. So I really appreciate the effort that you've done to make this a very factual way to say that, no, it's not closing.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. If I could.
Sure.
So in looking at and I'm drawing this from the 6-8 enrollment projections from the Applied Population Lab slide, it appears as though at the time that they did this, they were projecting, at least at the middle school level, some stabilization in terms of population within the district, if I'm reading this right. So it would almost seem to suggest that between 24, 25, and 2030, it would remain stable or even increase a little bit at the middle school level. I didn't get a chance to look at whether that's also true in their projections for the high school, but
The high school drops.
if middle school's stable, what's driving a high school drop? What am I missing in that equation?
What you're seeing is the
Roll out.
small middle school classes are now hitting the high school. They're riding out the wave of the larger classes as they finish high school, and it's being replaced with more stable classes over time. And it should show a slowing rate of decline. But as you and I talked earlier today, just because these kids are here, I mean, these studies have been, like Dr. Siebert said, the studies have been right on, but we're adding Mill Creek, we're adding.
Sure.
So this is a very fluid conversation, just so people who are listening know, if they come back, well, there's a lot of variables that change every single year, but I think you're just getting kind of the stabilization at the elementary levels now flowing into the middle school and will hopefully flow into the high schools, but we'll be settling at a much lower number than where we've been historically.
So one other question is, I was just kind of looking at the data this afternoon. One of the things I looked at was, as a percentage of the total population, say of the high school population,
Okay.
how much does North represent? How much does West? How much does the South represent? It appears to me as though over the last 5 years, we've seen, and it's not significant, but while middle school has remained relatively stable, the percentage of Butler students, for example, that make up the total middle school population is always right around 35%. And Horning is always right around 27%. But in the high school, I see West increasing by about 3%, while North has dropped a couple percentage points. Do we know what's driving that? Is there something from a population perspective within the district, or is there more building going on within the West District, people moving out of North? It doesn't look like from open enrollment numbers or not open enrollment, but district transfers, it would account for that. Do we know what's driving that decline? And it's not significant. I mean, we're talking a couple of percentage points. We're talking a couple dozen, 3, 4 dozen students, but I'm just wondering if that trend is something that we understand at all.
There is building on the west side, but in addition to that, we have intra-district open enrollment that you mentioned, and West, I think, is attractive to some families based on not knowing maybe if North is going to be there. I think the fact that we continue to, part of this rumor, I think, is attributed to the fact that we are needing to co-op more and more athletic teams, particularly between North and South, which West generally is not part of that. So there are different factors, I think, that drive families to think about West potentially differently than they may think about North. But, I welcome some of our parents to chime in on that too, in addition to yourself.
One other thing is West also has space to take on more inter-district transfers. South is running at, I don't know, you never say 100%, but they're running in the upper 90s or 95 to 100, where West has several hundred seats open based on capacity. So that the option to bringing kids outside of their boundaries is greater. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I don't know if that's truly happening or not, but just a thought.
I would agree that what we're seeing is not only inter-district, but we're also seeing through open enrollment, especially for some of the athletic programs. Girls' basketball was one classic piece, was while we're talking handfuls of students, West is attractive for all of that. So it's both.
And I guess I just want to make clear, looking at this, I mean, it still looks like North is operating somewhere around about 85% capacity. We're not talking about a significant impact on, like capacity, like it's opening up a bunch of capacity. I just wondered what that trend tells us, if we know.
Yeah, we're definitely not talking about like when we were having the Whittier and Hadfield discussion, and we're talking about using a combined, I believe it was like 42% of the buildings, right? We're nowhere close to that. At the same time, though, I mean, we are, let me make sure I tell you the right number. And we have a gap of 944 kids at the high school level in terms of our capacity. So, I mean, no, we're not there. We're not a Whittier Hadfield discussion, but we have a number of open seats, and most of them currently are at West.
Dr. Piasek?
I have a couple just maybe math questions and then some comments. And Dr. Siebert, thank you for all of the data. One of the things that kind of stands out to me is that if you look over the 6 years of data that you provided, that middle school decrease is about twice the high school decrease. So we drop about 13% over that 6 years at the middle school, and then about a little over 6% at the high school. So we kind of know there's a bubble coming, right? We know that that could change. I think we've also seen a little bit with the COVID trend that some middle school families opted out either to private school or to virtual, and now we're looking to come back, because I know those have been questions about, as we brought the integrated math curriculum on, how do those kids kind of on-ramp back in at the high school level? So that will be interesting to kind of see what happens with that. But that's something that just kind of stands out at me, because as someone who owns a lot of purple clothing, and has been extremely satisfied with the academic and an extracurricular experience that my kids have had. I don't know that we can ever sit here and say never, right? And I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I think as a district, looking at the numbers is the best thing for us to do, right? We have to monitor, does every student in high school in our district have access to all of the academic resources that they need? And every school offers something unique, right? South has amazing experiences and the charter school access, and North has a tremendous amount of trade and dual enrollment and dual language. And so there's just so much that each one of those schools offers. And I think maybe that's the beautiful thing about the interdistrict choice opportunities that our students and families have, is that we have different experiences that are going to work for different families. The part that I know frustrates the North families, especially the North youth athletics families, greatly, is when families from West will tell a student or a family, well, North is closing, so you should come play sports here. Or they can't create a team, so you should come play sports here. So what I would just love to see is more collaboration and really district level interest in making sure that all of our students have an exceptional academic and extracurricular experience. Because it's going to be different depending on what high school you go to. The culture's just going to be different. And that's something that, again, because of the flexibility in our choice programs, that the families can choose. But for me, I think it's really important that individual schools aren't working against each other, that we're actually setting the expectation that they're working together. And I think that that's something that our youth programs have to figure out how to do collaboratively. Again, being in the arm wrestles for, gym space, I get it. I understand that everybody's trying to do what's in the best interest of their own programs. But I think when people run with just unvalidated fact around this is going to happen or that's going to happen. I've heard rumors that there's facility problems, and due to those facility problems that certain schools might have to close, and there's just no basis for that. So I think that's on all of us as board members, it's on community members. The challenge is that when somebody asks me, and I get asked a lot also, say, if I tell you no, you think I'm lying. I have no basis to tell you yes, right? So I appreciate that the administration is spending a lot of time looking at the data and trying to understand, again, how to best provide the best possible experience and services to all the kids in the district. But looking at this data, we can't deny the fact that we had a 13% decrease in middle school enrollment over the last 6 years. And we're going to have to pay really close attention to that to make sure that we can effectively serve all of those students as they move through the system. So, I expect, just looking at the birth rates over the last 3 years, that we're going to start to see something happening in our elementary schools here pretty soon. And I didn't mean for that to sound negative, right? I'm super positive about what we have and what we can offer in looking at the capacity, but I think it's really hard for us to sit here and say, 20 years from now, we fully expect that we're going to have 3 high schools operating at capacity. And yet, I think we're doing pretty amazing things here in the district, and we should be a destination district for a lot of families. So maybe that's the reality.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add is if people want to Google these types of topics, we are not alone in the state of Wisconsin talking about a high schooler or an elementary schooler. I mean, this is a national birth rate issue, not just a Wisconsin or a Waukesha issue. So in case they're thinking it's just us, it's not true.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Siebert and staff.
Thank you.
This was helpful. Good information. As a data nut, I appreciate it.
Wonderful.
All right, so the next topic is other business. Is there any recommendations for future committee meetings? So we do have a need to go into closed session tonight, and we will have to come back into open session for voting. Our next Finance and Facilities meeting will be on Monday, August 7th. There are no committee meetings in July at 5:30 PM in the boardroom. So,
We won't be coming back. The contract that we may have been voting on didn't come together.
thank you.
So anyone who's watching or well, I guess there's another meeting, it's like the old days. I don't foresee us coming back into open session.
Okay. So I'd be looking for someone to read the motion to adjourn into executive session.
I'll do it.
Thanks, Dr. Piasek.
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specific public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. People transportation contract, security project, and sale of district property.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, 5-0. We are concluded. We'll see you in August.